What is life? On this planet, at least, all life is based on cells. Cell is the smallest functional unit of life. Now, there are multiple levels when we're talking about life. And so the cells are built out of lower levels of organization. They are built of organelles. Organelles are built of molecules. Molecules are built of atoms. In multicellular organisms, like us, there are also higher levels of organization. Cells uh, form tissues, and multiple tissues form organs, and multiple organs which have kind of the same function. They put together constitute an organ system. All the organ systems together make an organism. That organism then interacts with its environment. The environment can be the chemical and physical environment, but also biological environment, all the other organisms that we interact with, let's say bacteria or a snake that bites us or a pet that makes us happy. This also includes the social environment, which are individuals of the same species, which can affect our physiology in various ways, especially people who are close to us, your mother, partner, your child. Uh, so, uh, so life is hierarchical in the sense that it has several different layers of organization. You can think them like, the nested Russian dolls, where there's a small doll inside of a bigger doll, inside of a bigger doll, inside of a bigger doll. And the thing is, every layer, every level of organization has its own specifics, and you cannot infer from lower levels how the higher levels are going to look like and how they're going to work. So, for instance, by knowing the sequence of DNA, still have no idea. You can't read from that what kind of an organism that's going to be and how it's going to look like. You're going to look at specific genes for particular enzymes or growth factors or something like that, but no idea how the animal actually looks like. So each level of organization brings what is called emergent properties. It is the emergent properties of interactions of the elements at the lower level that build the higher level. It is not the identity of those lower level elements, but the types of interactions between them that build the next level. So, how would you figure out what is living and what is non-living in, so let's say, an ambiguous case? So, let's say you go on a spaceship and go and land on an exoplanet somewhere else, and there's lots of rocks and sand and all sorts of other stuff there, and then on top of some rocks you find some purple goo. How would you figure out if that purple goo is alive or not? So you're going to look at various different properties of life. And some of them might be shared with some non life too, but if it has all of those properties, then it's living. So the first one is the one that I already talked about, and that is order, and that is that kind of nested hierarchical organization that you have bigger parts made up of smaller parts that don't look alike. So if you have a crystal of salt, right, the small molecule of salt, you build a bunch of molecules of salt, small parts look exactly the same as the big parts. A big chunk, a block of salt, is the same kind of shape and characteristics as the smallest grain of salt. So the size, and if you take a big chunk and break it up into little parts, those little parts look exactly the same as the big part. There's no hierarchy there. You don't have levels. You don't have hierarchical nested levels of organization. um, Living things are going to be sensitive or responsive to their environment. Even the simplest organisms, like bacteria, are going to respond and act upon different changes in the environment. So the bacteria are going to swim towards a greater concentration of food in its environment and going to swim away if they detect toxins. They might swim towards or away from, let's say, light, or use Earth's magnetic field to orient themselves. So even the simple organisms as bacteria are going to sense the environment and respond to it. The non-living materials are not going to respond in any kind of organized way or an adaptive way. It's going to be pure physics. So if you expose the metal uh, to heat, it's going to expand. Yeah, it doesn't do that in any kind of adaptive way. It's just pure physics. Growth, development, and reproduction. So you all seen videos or did it in the lab that you put like some kind of a seeding grain inside of a solution, and then the crystal grows over time. Well, when the crystal grows over time, it's just adding atoms or molecules to it and building more and more of the mass. And yet, it's a homogeneous mass. All the parts are still the same. Uh, while an organism growing undergoes development, it changes its shape, it changes the way, as let's say an embryo develops, the organs move around and one grows first and then the next one, and this moves from here to there. And so there's a lot of movement and change. And as it's growing, it's also growing in complexity. There is going to be more and more complex internal divisions into different organs and different cavities, and also, so the cells differentiate, and so there is going to be a profound difference between the organism at the beginning and the organism at the end. It's not just growing in size. And then there's reproduction. Sure, you can break off a piece of crystal off of a bigger crystal. That's not reproduction. Reproduction is there's some requirement to reproduction, and that is that the progeny look like their parents. And for that, you need to have some kind of a way for heredity to be encoded. On the planet Earth, it's encoded on uh, DNA mostly. Some viruses is RNA. We can talk about viruses, are they living or not? When they're sitting on a desk, they're not. When they're inside of the cells, they are. So they go between life and non life. So the offspring are similar to parents because there is a genetic code that ensures that the development proceeds in the same steps, and that the grown organism has the same enzymes and same biochemistry as the parents. Regulation. Um, so organisms, living things, have evolved biochemical, physiological, and behavioral mechanisms that ensure what we call homeostasis, uh, the body integrity, the internal environment that allows the body integrity so that an organism doesn't die, doesn't fall apart. Uh, so all those different body parts are regulating different aspects of the internal environment, being temperature or saltwater balance or pH. Those kinds of things are are necessary for life, and that's our necessary definition of what life is. Even more important is how an organism processes energy. A living organism has evolved mechanisms for absorbing, storing, converting, using, and dissipating energy. It is not just passive. Okay, it's hot, I get warmer, it's cold, I get cooler. There are ways, even in the most simple bacteria, of processing energy, taking it in actively, and then maybe converting from chemical to heat energy or whatever, storing it somewhere, usually inside of the bonds of molecules like ATP, and being able to dissipate it in some way when there's too much of it, let's say when you're overheating. So that is probably the best test for an organism, uh, how it processes energy. Is it active or passive? If it's active, it's living. If it's passive, it's not living. Then there's metabolism, which is related to this, which means that the organism is breaking down molecules from its environment, taking it in, breaking it down, and that breakdown is going to release the energy from the chemical bonds. And then this organism takes those same parts. It just broke down a big molecule into small ones or even atoms, and takes those same small molecules and atoms and puts them together into a larger molecules that it needs, and it needs to use the energy to make those molecules. Breakdown of large molecules into small is called catabolism, and build of large molecules out of small pieces is called anabolism. Every organism has to have catabolism and anabolism. And then there is movement. Yes, some non-living things can move too. Wind moves, right? But movement is purposeful. Uh, Plants move, sponges move. Uh, their movement might be different from us. They're not moving the same way we do by walking, jumping, or flying, or running, or swimming. They move by growth, so it's much smaller, slower movement. But a vine, how does a vine move? By growing around something, right? Or attaching itself to a tree or to a wall or to a fence. Uh, Sunflowers turn. So they're plants that move. Carnivorous plant, like a Venus flytrap, definitely moves quite fast. So there is movement in everything. So if you find that purple goo, you're going to test for all of that. It's a different planet in a different world. It may or may not be based on carbon. It may or may not have DNA. It may or may not be based on cells. Well, it's likely. Um, so you're not going to look for specific things for the Earth life. You're going to look for these general properties of metabolism, movement, growth, development, reproduction, uh, hierarchical order, regulation, and especially sensitivity and responsiveness, and especially the way it deals with energy. So, one of the ways that you could test if that purple goo is alive or not is to see, is there any difference in that purple goo that you can measure between day and night time. So let's say you had an exoplanet, and let's say that a day and there is, I don't know, 26 hours long, and then there's about 13 hours of day and about 13 hours of night. And you figure out to measure something, some chemistry, or I don't know, a gas that's being evaporated out of it. Maybe it changes color, maybe it shrinks at night and expands during the day. There's got to be some kind of a measure, something that's different between day and night. And if you can find that, that's already an indication that it might be alive, but it's not necessarily so. So you take that purple goo and put it on your spaceship in an isolation chamber where you can turn on the light for 13 hours and switch off the light for 13 hours. Thus, you're mimicking the light and the day and night on that planet. And you see that, in that chamber, it's working over a few days, over a few cycles. It's working every time there's light. It does one thing. When it's dark, it does the other thing. And you can measure it, and it's good. Then you turn off the light. So it never comes on. And so now that organism is in constant darkness for 3, 4, 5, 10 days, and yet you observe that it's still undergoing those same changes. Every 13 hours is just one thing, 13 hours the other thing, 13 one, 13 the other, 13 one, 13 the other. It is rhythmical, which means that it has evolved a circadian clock, which every organism has to have, and which means that it has an internal timing program that tells it when it's supposed to be day, when it's supposed to be night, and to process energy differently, because whatever you are measuring is going to be an indicator of some change in the way that organism uses energy. So if you see that kind of a rhythm or cycle, you know for sure that this is alive. If you don't see that, then it's probably not alive. You might find an exception, you might have to do more study. But if you do, you have a definitive answer that this is alive.